The Kingdom of Aksum was one of the greatest civilizations of Africa. It lasted for almost 1,000 years throughout the first millennium. It grew rich and powerful through its control of the Red Sea trade. The kings of Aksum embraced Christianity as their official religion and had their own written language and coins. But just as empires rise, so inevitably they must decline. In this program, we look at what brought about the fall of the Kingdom of Aksum and the kings and emirs who followed in their wake. This is the modern city of Aksum in northern Ethiopia. At the beginning of the 7th century, it was the heart of a Christian kingdom that was also a major trading power. Aksum covered a large area of territory on the east coast of Africa. But crucially, it also controlled the southern Arabian Peninsula. This gave it dominance over the trade routes to the whole of Arabia, India, China, and Europe, and markets for its gold, frankincense, and ivory. Through its port at Adulis on the Red Sea in modern-day Eritrea, Aksum enjoyed a strategic position that made it a gateway not only for the import and export of goods, but also ideas, culture, and beliefs. And from across the Red Sea in the 7th century, there came a major influence which would have a profound impact on Africa and the world. In the province of Hijaz, in modern-day Saudi Arabia, in a town called Mecca, a religion emerged. That religion was Islam, and Muhammad was its prophet. Islam spread relatively easily. Its doctrine was simple to understand. It didn't have a complex hierarchical religious priesthood, so the believer could worship God directly without the intercession of a cleric. At first, Aksum enjoyed good relations with the Muslims of Arabia. In fact, a group of early Muslim converts from Mecca were given sanctuary by the Christian Aksumite king Amr. These Muslims crossed the Red Sea and arrived on what is now the coast of Eritrea. The Eritreans lay claim to having the first Muslim shrine in the world, dating back to the early 7th century. This is what remains of it. What is certainly true is that around 615 AD, some followers of the Prophet Muhammad fled persecution in Arabia, crossed the Red Sea, and arrived here. They sought protection in the court of King Amr, the Aksumite king. He received them favorably and granted them protection. This is supposed to be the exact location where they prayed in what is now the port of Massawa. An-Nur Haj Muhammad is from the Muslim community in the Eritrean capital Asmara.
فالإسلام دخل في إريتريا 614 ميلادي بعد ما عملوا عليهم قريش النبي وصحابته عملوا عليه ضغوطات فقال لهم سيدنا الرسول قال لهم امشوا للحبشه لان فيه ملك عادل دخلوا مصوى وعملوا فيه مسجد بعدين قابلوا هنا النجاشي استقبلهم استقبال كويس ووروه عن الاسلام ايش هو ما كان طبعا قبل كده كان هنا الدين المسيحي وبعد القبائل الوثنيه كانت اريتريا هنا في البلد ده خصوصا ساحل البحر الأحمر كلها دخل الإسلام بالجزيرة العربية بدون حرب بدون أي حاجة.
The burial site of some of these early Muslims who arrived in Aksum is still a revered place. The compound of the main mosque in Nagash in northern Ethiopia is believed to be the resting place of 15 of the early followers of the Prophet Muhammad. Some of them returned to Mecca when it was safe for them to do so. Those who remained were buried here, 5 women and 10 men. The compound is a Muslim cemetery that has seen many burials throughout the ages, so Islam has old and strong roots in both Ethiopia and Eritrea. That is because although some Arabs came just as transient traders to Africa, others brought their religion with them and settled. Ahmed Zakaria is the chief curator of the Ethiopian Studies Museum at Addis Ababa University.
Saudi Arabia used to export dates, textiles directly from their product or as intermediary from Indian Ocean to this area. So there were precious items for palaces and for the churches. The relationship between the Arabs and the Aksumite Empire, we see it extremely smooth relationship because families were going there and some Arab settlers were also coming here. And so we are talking of stronger relation, blood tie relationship, not only trade. So the Red Sea was not a barrier, one could say.
However, the rise and growth of Islam began to challenge the power of the Christian Aksumite kings, and this led to hostilities between them and the Muslims. The Aksumites made a series of attacks on parts of the Arabian Peninsula that they didn't control, like the coastal town of Jeddah across the sea from the Aksumite port of Adulis.
Ships used to come to Adulis and attack, and leaders of Adulis were also going to Jeddah and attack. That was going in between them for a long time. The Arabs became strong in late 7th century. Islam unified them, and they start expanding.
It was trade that made the kingdom of Aksum great. And one of the main reasons for its economic decline was that the Arabs seized control of the Red Sea trade route from them. For a kingdom whose wealth had been based on trade, this was a severe blow to its power and prestige. By the 8th century AD, the Aksumite port of Adulis had been destroyed, and Aksum would not be able to recover its former standing. Thus, the center of power shifted inland from the coast. But Ahmed Zakaria says religious rivalry wasn't the only factor that led to the decline of Aksum.
Aksum decayed because of environmental factor. Some archaeologists suggesting that the water table moved down, and that affects the vegetation of the area because they were depending on ivory, slave, and gold. Ivory was out of business because of the ecology. And there was also another suggestion, it has to be proven, that there was a disease, endemic disease in that area, and Aksum decimated because of that.
All this meant that the decline of the kingdom was imminent. The history of the kings and patriarchs, or the Kebre Nagast, which glorified Christian rule, describes the violent end of the Aksumite era. If it was the Muslims who'd contributed to putting the Aksumite kings under pressure, it was their old rivals, the Jews, who dealt them the final blow. There'd been Jews living in this part of Africa well before Christianity was introduced. Many of these Jews had converted to Christianity, but some had kept their religion. So, towards the end of the first millennium, there were Jews, Christians, and Muslims all living in Aksum. It was a kingdom in which the three major monotheistic religions cohabited, but at times their interests would diverge. Traditional accounts relate that Aksum was destroyed by a queen called Judith or Yodit, and that she was Jewish. She was probably from the Agor people, who were Judaic in culture and basic religious beliefs. I'm granted a rare audience with the head of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, His Holiness Abuna Matthias, who tells me more about Queen Judith and the impact she had on the church.
She was a warrior woman, so she destroyed the Ethiopian historic holy books in many parts of the country, and she was, unbelievable. She did unbelievable destruction in the country because her belief is Judaism, not Christianity. So she destroyed many books. So she is not accepted by the Ethiopian people.
Judith, or Yodit as she was known in Amharic, could have been a figure representing several individuals who may have existed over 2 to 3 centuries. Whatever her provenance, she's held to have destroyed all symbols of Christian and imperial Aksumite power. In fact, the Judaic influence from Ethiopia's early history is still evident today.
Judaism was in Ethiopia before Christianity, and many of them converted to Christianity, and the others stayed in their own Judaism religion belief, but they were in Aksum and in other places also.
But to this day, I understand that Christian Orthodox believers in Ethiopia do have some traditions which are similar to Judaism. For example, the circumcision of boys on the 8th day, and also it's forbidden for people to eat pork. And Saturday is also a bit of a holy day as well as Sunday. How many traditions of Judaism do you think have remained in the Christian Orthodox Church here?
Well, yes, the Saturday was respected by our forefathers because according to the Bible. So gradually, now we are celebrating Sunday mostly, but it was mixed before. Many years ago, those were respected by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church.
So, according to tradition, the story of Aksum began with a woman, the Queen of Sheba, whose son Menelik became the first Aksumite king, and it ended with a woman, the Jewish queen Judith. Her burial stela lies in a field in Aksum. Ironically, her name and grave are forever connected to the great kingdom she destroyed. The end of the Aksumite dynasty spelt the rise of a new one known as the Zagwe dynasty. This represented a revival of fortune for the Christians. At about 1150 AD, a group of army officers from a place known as Agu seized the throne from the weakened descendants of the Aksumites and replaced them with military leaders. They founded a new capital in the Central Highlands at Adefa, or Lalibela as it's better known, and established the Zagwe dynasty. The most famous of the Zagwe kings was Lalibela, who gave his name to the city. His reign began sometime in the 13th century and is thought to have lasted about 40 years. Under him, the people of Lalibela soon prospered and enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle. And the city became established as a place of pilgrimage. It still attracts many visitors who come as pilgrims or tourists today. It's also refreshing to know that the young people here tell me that they're proud of their history and the founder of their city. King Lalibela is credited with building a remarkable series of churches hewn out of solid rock. There are 11 of these churches, and they represent an extraordinary achievement of engineering. Just imagine chipping away at the rock to carve out a church this size without the benefit of a mechanical digger.
It's likely that King Lalibela would have walked through this very doorway of the church of Beit Medhani Alam, which is the biggest of the churches here at Lalibela and indeed is the largest rock-hewn church in the world.
Fikru Walde Georgis is a local guide born and bred in Lalibela. He's lived and worked here all his life.
King Lalibela is the one who behind these marvelous rock-hewn churches. So he was a king and a priest as well, and later canonized by the church as a saint. So he's known as Saint Lalibela. And he carved out these marvelous rock-hewn churches, of course, not only him, with his people and with the help of angels. And the churches are really unique. They're not built up, but cut out of one piece of rock. So it's like statue. Everything is the same material. The wall, the roof, the pillar, all is one piece of rock. And that's really an extraordinary engineering back in the 1200s, using basic materials like hammer, chisel, just simple. No split level, no dynamite, no drilling, just using chisel and buckets.
But there are historians who believe that the complex of churches here at Lalibela could not have been built in the reign of a single king. You believe that the angels helped King Lalibela build these churches?
Yes, because the idea was to recreate Jerusalem. Of course, there is a theory also, the churches are made in different periods, but the Ethiopian Orthodox Church strongly believes that. That includes me. These are done during the time of Lalibela, within 23 years period, with the help of angels.
Lalibela attracts the faithful in their hundreds of thousands every year.
So this is an interesting duo. Are they pilgrims?
They are pilgrims, and even he's a pilgrim and a hermit as well.
He's a hermit as well. How do you know he's a hermit?
You can tell from his dreadlock.
So this is the natural hairstyle here of hermits?
Yes, the hermit leaves their hair as it is.
Where does he live?
Yet no minors yet. Yeah, for hermits there is no place to stay. He just walks from place to place, from monastery to monastery. So according to the will of God, he goes to a place that God wants him to be.
Is this your first time here at Lalibela?
He comes every time.
Oh, and he walks. How long does it take him to walk here?
3 days.
Takes him 3 days to walk here.
So when it's really far, sometimes it could be like 2 weeks.
So the idea that pilgrims and hermits would come here to Lalibela, King Lalibela's idea was to relieve Christians of having to make the long journey to Jerusalem.
So the idea was recreating Jerusalem here in Ethiopia. And there is also belief that pilgrims to Lalibela, they share the same blessing as pilgrims to Jerusalem. So you can imagine how important really it is for those pilgrims.
You walk all the way?
He always walks. Sometimes people give him a lift, but he mainly walks with bare feet. With bare feet, no shoes at all.
Really?
Because he's hermit.
But isn't that uncomfortable, walking on all sorts of terrain?
Of course it is. It's not really easy.
Very tough skin there.
The remains of earlier pilgrims to Lalibela who died on arrival. It's considered a blessing to die here. The resting place for these particular worshippers is in the most greatly admired of the churches at Lalibela, St. George's. And when one visits, one can see why. Dug out from deep down underground, it's a marvelous sight and a remarkable feat of construction for that era.
Fikru, St. George's Church is remarkably intact, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it's also the last one to be made. And as you can see, they start from the top, cut down, and then separated all sides. Again, through the doors, they went all the way up, or they hollowed it. Look at the corners, how exactly and nicely made they are. So imagine there's no place for a mistake. And look at also the gutter. So the gutter itself is hewn out of the rock and has got 12 open windows, 9 blind windows, and 3 doors. And the most sophisticated detail of this church is the thickness of the wall. It's thicker at the bottom, or it tapers up. So that helps the church to be stable.
And, you know, I can just see that even today, there are so many people coming to worship still.
Yeah, all of the churches are still functioning. Every day, every morning, churches are open for a service. So this is a living heritage, never been abandoned even for a single day, and always in use.
Can we go inside?
Yes, we can.
Take our shoes off first.
Yes, shoes off.
This is the Church of St. Mary, which has the best preserved internal decorations, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So this one is Beta Mariam, believed to be the first one of all. Even has got a loft. And there is staircase cut out of the rock and spiral to the loft. And highly decorated church with nicely made paintings. There is a fresco, which is painted on the wall. Of course, it's not direct to the rock. They first plastered the wall and then painted it. And there is also an engraving, which is carved. They first carved and painted it. And there is also a canvas, which is painted on a cotton, glued to the wall or framed.
When King Lalibela died, he was laid to rest just a few meters to my left in one of the rock-hewn churches. The church he was buried in is called Golgotha, named after the spot in Jerusalem where Jesus Christ was crucified. Inside the church, there's a series of life-size relief carvings of the 12 apostles, and a modern, colourful depiction of King Lalibela himself stands by the curtain behind which his tomb lies, hidden from public display. Let's find out more about Muslims in this part of Africa. I make my way to the Dahlak Islands on Eritrea's Red Sea coast near the modern-day port of Massawa. The Dahlak Islanders were amongst the first to embrace Islam. The largest of the islands is mostly populated by the local Afar people, who greet me formally but warmly. There are more than 200 islands which form the Dahlak archipelago off the Eritrean coast on the Red Sea. Largely arid and flat, fresh water is scarce, so very few of the islands are inhabited. This is the biggest of the islands, Dahlak Kabir, and I've been granted rare access by the Eritrean authorities to come here. أهلاً شكراً شكراً أهلاً أنت اسمك مين؟
صالح إدريس.
صالح إدريس. أهلاً وسهلاً.
أهلا وسهلا.
فأنت يعني رئيس القبيل في القرية هنا.
أيوة شيبة القرية هنا.
أنت من الناس العفر.
عفر.
العفر.
يكون كيف؟ حقنا نحن ناس استنونا هنا قبل كده موجودين، أبهاتنا أبهات أبهاتنا جداتنا كله إحنا مولودين في البلد هذه.
The Arab legacy is evident on the Dahlak Islands, and indeed some of the inhabitants proudly proclaim their Arab ancestry, as this local official confirms.
أهلاً وسهلاً. أهلاً وسهلاً. شكراً جزيلاً. اعتبر نفسك يعني عندك دم عربي ولا بتشوف نفسك يعني بس إريتريي فقط.
لا أحس مسلم كان عربي هذا أصول وجذور لا ننكر.
وبتتكلم عربي في المنزل وكذا؟ Do you speak Arabic at home?
نتكلم باللغة المحلية اللي هي الدهلك.
So you speak in the local Dahlak language, and does that have any Arabic in it? اللغة الدهلكية فيها أي كلمات عربية؟
فيها كلمات عربية وفيها كلمات من التقري وفيها كلمات من أنواع كثيرة ملخبطة مأخوذة من هنا ومن هنا.
إزاي يكون أنتم ملخبطين؟ Your language is mixed, just as you are.
Abdu Ahmed wants to show me the graves of Muslims who lived and died on the Dahlak Islands, and these ruins, he tells me, are significant.
فذل بيعتبروا يعني الناس بيفتكروا هذا مغابر مسلمين حوالي من القرن العشراوي لحد القرن الخامسعشراوي. So some people believe that these are Muslim tombs dating from the 10th to the 15th century. This one obviously has got some Arabic inscription. It's got Quranic inscriptions, so that would seem to support the theory that these are Muslim tombs from after the time that the Arab Muslims seized control of Dahlak Islands. But evidently, looking at the extent of the cemetery here, there must have been many more people in centuries gone by who lived here.
فلان ابن فلان المتوفي سنة كذا كذا في حجرة تقريبا 1800 سنة.
So this could be either a grand tomb of somebody, or it could be a small place where people came to pray. Thank you. شكرا جزيلا.
منطقة كانت طبعا منطقة.
The Dahlak Islands are like stepping stones in the Red Sea, so it's easy to see why the Arabs could cross over and quickly establish Islam on the islands soon after its introduction. The flow of these early groups of Muslims into the highland areas happened gradually. By the 12th century, there were sufficient Muslim communities for a sultanate to be formed, known as the Sultanate of Shoa. Relations between the Zagwe kings and the Muslim communities in the highlands were relatively cordial, though a commercial rivalry soon emerged. Dr. Tekle Haymanot Gebri Selassie is a historian at Addis Ababa University.
The Zagwe kings, like the other Ethiopian kings, tolerated the Muslims because it was very important for them to get imported items from abroad. And the agents were Muslims, because the Muslims could have gone easily to Saudi Arabia and other places which were Islamic states. So for that reason, it was mandatory. They used Muslims as their agents for trade, simply because the Christians could not have easily penetrated into the Muslim areas. The Arab traders or the Muslim traders supplied the Zagwis and later on others with different items, mainly finished clothes.
But from the 13th century, signs of rivalry between the Christians and Muslims were really beginning to show.
Between 13th century to 16th century, we see lots of bloody clashes between the Muslims and the Christians. Not because of religion, but because of trade control.
By 1300, the Sultanate of Shoa was overtaken by a rival Muslim sultanate called Ifat. The Ifat rulers went deeper into the highlands, and that brought them into more violent clashes with the Christians of Zagwe. Unable to resist the might of the Zagwe dynasty, the Muslim Sultanate of Ifat withdrew east to Harar. But the conflict was not entirely based on religion.
Here also we see it's power politics, not religion. You can utilize religion as mobilizing factors to a certain extent, but not the cause. It's not to spread a religion. It's to capture power. For me, it's difficult to consider religious wars in Ethiopian context, because they were from same culture, same background, and they could move from one to the other easily, from one religion to the other.
In Harar, the Muslims founded a new kingdom called Adal in the 1400s, and they began to build their new center and power base here. Visit Harar today, and you immediately get a sense that this is a city with deep historic roots.
This is the site of the oldest mosque in Harar. In fact, there are more than 80 mosques within the historic city walls. That is a lot of mosques. Throughout the centuries, the center of power of Islam has shifted, but there is no question that Harar is the most important Muslim city in Ethiopia.
The graves of some of the celebrated early Muslims of Harar are still venerated today. This is the tomb of Sheikh Abadir, one of the most respected Muslims in Harar's history. His tomb states he was buried in the 10th century. Amir Redwan is the guide at the site.
He came with his 44 companions and made the people as he unified people who were here, so that the people here stopped fighting for racial things. He assembled everybody and he made a great sermon. He is like the unifier, and he is our father in spiritually. So everybody here coming here means being enlightened for everybody.
Who visits the tomb of Sheikh Abadir?
Muslims, non-Muslims, and all people from from all tribal groups, and Somalis, Hararis, anybody around.
We go outside to see some of the burial sites in the compound.
Amir, I noticed that some of the graves here have a stone in the middle. What does that mean?
So this means female figures are buried in here, like great mystics who used to live in here.
So women in Ethiopian Islam are considered to be almost religious authorities?
Yes, here they are even given, the place of as a saints or walis. Unlike other places, we have lots of them. Like even the mother of Sheikh Abadir, who is buried just right here, is also considered one of the great Sufi even saints.
For the next 2 centuries, the Muslims of Adal, with their stronghold in Harar, and the Christians of the region were in a pretty permanent state of high tensions, if not all-out conflict. In 1270, the Zagwe kings were overthrown by a nobleman, Yakuno Amlak, who'd raised an army against them. He re-established the Solomonic dynasty and laid the foundations for modern Ethiopia. Yakuno Amlak's relations with the Muslims were also strained. Both sides would initiate attacks on the other at various times.
Harar was used as a base by its Muslim rulers to launch attacks against Christians, but it also served as a defense against raids by pagan Oromo tribes.
This meant that Harar was a prosperous, bustling urban centre, as it still is today.
This is some frankincense, which I've picked up in the market at Harar, and it smells wonderfully aromatic. And just as this was critical to Aksumite trade, centuries later, frankincense was a valuable export commodity that helped the Muslim state of Harar prosper.
Time to meet some of the locals, I think. So, after the evening call to prayer, I make my way to a traditional home in Harar to meet a couple of the established residents.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hi. Hello.
How are you?
I'm Zainab. Fine.
Welcome,
Hello.
welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Fatihia. Hello. Hello. Thank you. So this is
Zainab.
your house?
Yes.
Yes. Very beautiful house.
Thank you.
The owner of the house, Juhaira, is joined by a friend who can speak Arabic and so can interpret for me.
Busy all day.
Yes, always.
Hawira tells me Juhaira works in a government office.
The president office.
She also supplements her income by running her home as a guest house.
And guest house.
ده بيكون guest house. ده guest house. انت يعني عندكم guest house هنا.
ايوه.
الناس بيجوا يقعدوا.
يعني ما سمعتي هذا لو ده guest house.
ما سمعت عنه. وبيجوا الناس.
عندي مجلة في مجلة.
بيجوا من فين؟ بيجوا من
كل مكان بيجوا.
I'm sure her guests must, like me, appreciate the decorative ornaments all over the house. There's barely a spot on the wall that doesn't have something hanging from it.
So Harar is the most famous Muslim city in Ethiopia. أشهر مدينة مسلمة في الحبش حرار. مش كده؟ ويعني أنتم فاخرون.
I ask them both how life is in this famous city and they tell me they're proud to come from Harar.
والمسلمين في باقي الحبش بيجوا هنا لحرار عشان يشوفوا المدينة وكده عشان أهم مدينة للمسلمين فيها.
They also want to emphasize that in their experience, communal relations are excellent in Harar today between people of different faiths.
كل واحد.
يا كل واحد.
No problem. No problem.
Yes.
No problem.
مشكلة.
It's dusk, and I thank my hosts and take my leave, for I want to go and see an enduring, if bizarre, custom that exists in Harar. I'm going to see the extraordinary hyena men of Harar.
Every evening, the men and boys whistle to entice hyenas in from the wild, and then they'll feed them with their own hands. And I have to confess, I am a little bit nervous because I know that some hyenas would just suddenly emerge in the darkness out of nowhere. I'm not quite sure I'm prepared for that.
It's a myth that hyenas are just scavengers. They do kill to eat. In fact, they have the strongest jaw of all predators. That's all very reassuring for me, to put it mildly. These young men actually pass the food from their own mouths to that of the hyenas. Brave, foolhardy, or both?
This is a tradition that dates back for centuries, and the idea was that they would feed the hyenas to try to prevent them from eating their livestock.
dalagaa tan abbaa kiyyaa eegalee jira isa marraayin fuudhee jira innilleen ni jira amma xiqqoo dura isin dura kutee jira dalagaa tana amata torbattiin eegalee soon xiqqaadha takkaana sodaachiseetis hin jiru na nyaateetis hin jiru.
Which animal do you feed them?
maal faa nyaachistaa maalirraa qaqalame?
Gaalaas jeen re'ees looniis nyaata jeen.
Do you know which ones are which? Can you identify them?
Addaan baafattiin beektaa isaan?
Cufa isaatu akkuma bakka akkamitti namaa fi nama adda baasuu dandeessa akkasumattiin isaas nama addaan baasuu danda'a jechuudha.
So I make my excuses and leave after declining an offer to feed the hyenas myself. I've come across a wedding in Harar and fortunately not a hyena in sight. The bride's modest wedding dress is a reminder that Islam is as much a part of Ethiopia's history as its Orthodox Christianity.
Behind me is one of the 5 gates of the historic walls of Harar. In the mid-16th century, Harar was established as the heart of Ethiopian Islam. The dynasty of the Emirs of Harar was founded, and they ruled Harar as a Muslim state for 3 centuries.
وارفع درجاتنا وارحم آبائنا واغفر لأمهاتنا وأصلح ديننا ودنيانا وشتت شمل أعدائنا واحفظ أهلنا وأموالنا وبلادنا من جميع الآفات والأمراض والبلاء بأقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين بحرمة القرآن العظيم يا قاضي الحاجات ويا مجيب الدعوات استجب دعانا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين الرحمن الرحيم الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم له ما في السماوات رحيم الله لا
I've come to visit one of the descendants of the hereditary rulers of Harar. Sheikh Maftuh Abu Bakr is the 8th generation of the Emirs of Harar, but the grand style he and his family lived in is a thing of the past. They give me a very relaxed welcome.
السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
شكرا جزيلا شيخ مفتوح. أنت أهم شخص من الأسرة المالكة هنا في حرر؟
نعم نعم.
والسكان هنا الناس لسه عندهم احترام كثير للأسرة المالكة؟
إيه صح.
فأنا عايز أسألك يعني للآن الناس اللي هنا عايشين في حرر إيه رأيهم عن الأسرة المالكة؟
ولا شيء أي شيء.
لسه يعني عايشين في عظمة مثلا؟ يعني بيعتبروكم طبعا كعلماء.
احترام فيه ولا؟
الاحترام فيه. كثير.
His wife Mawardi Abdallah earns money by sewing and weaving ornaments. The Sheikh and Sheikha are a reminder of the long history of Muslim rulers in Harar. Their home is an oasis of peace in what is a busy and lively city. Harar is still the most influential Muslim city in Ethiopia today, and the churches of Lalibela are the country's most famous Christian monuments. Back in the shadows of the historic churches at Lalibela in the central Ethiopian highlands, I enjoyed the traditional song and dance of the people of that area. The music and performance is as vibrant, colourful and evocative as the history of this region has been throughout the ages. From the pre-Aksumite civilizations to the rise and fall of the powerful kingdom of Aksum, from the Christian dynasties to the Muslim sultanates, Ethiopia and Eritrea represent a remarkable period in Africa's history. In the next programme, we travel to North Africa and ask, who are the Berbers or Amazigh, the people most associated with this part of the continent? What kind of kingdoms were established in North Africa, like the great city of Carthage? And how did the people flourish under Roman rule?